When Mark Carney picked up that phone call from Trump, he had three choices: fight back and risk a trade war, surrender and look weak, or play a game so sophisticated that Trump wouldn't realize he'd been outmaneuvered until it was too late. Carney chose option 3. What happened in those 45 minutes would reshape the balance of power between two nations forever. But the most shocking part? Trump walked away thinking he had won. This is the inside story of the most calculated phone call in modern diplomatic history. A conversation where every word was weaponized, every pause was strategic, and every concession was actually a trap. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand how Mark Carney turned apparent defeat into the most brilliant victory of his political career. Because sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as surrender.
Thursday, August 21st, 2025. The Prime Minister's office in Ottawa was unusually quiet for a summer afternoon. Mark Carney sat behind his desk, reviewing briefing notes that had been prepared weeks in advance. Outside his window, the Ottawa River flowed peacefully, but inside the corridors of power, tension was building like a storm about to break. For months, Canada had been locked in a brutal trade war with the United States. Trump's tariffs were crushing Canadian businesses. Steel workers in Hamilton were losing their jobs. Farmers in Saskatchewan couldn't export their grain. The Canadian dollar was tumbling, and Carney's approval ratings were starting to slip. But here's what the public didn't know yet. Carney wasn't playing defense. He was setting a trap. 3 weeks earlier, in a private meeting that never appeared on any official schedule, Carney had gathered his most trusted advisors in a secure room deep within the East Bloc. Present were Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, and Deputy Prime Minister Dominique LeBlanc. Also in the room was someone whose presence would have shocked political observers. David McNaughton, Canada's former ambassador to Washington and one of the few people who truly understood Trump's negotiating psychology. "He's going to call," McNaughton had told the group. "Trump always calls when he thinks he has maximum leverage, and when he does, he'll expect immediate capitulation." Carney had leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but calculating. "Then we'll give him exactly what he expects to hear." The strategy was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of matching Trump's aggression with aggression, Canada would appear to fold. But every concession would be carefully crafted to benefit Canada in the long term while giving Trump what he needed for his domestic audience. What none of them knew was that Carney had been studying Trump's playbook for months. During his years as governor of the Bank of England, Carney had dealt with volatile personalities before. He understood that with leaders like Trump, the key wasn't to oppose their need to win, it was to let them win battles while you won the war. That Thursday afternoon, as Carney waited for the call everyone knew was coming, his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, the White House is on line 1. Carney whipped at his watch. 3:47 p.m. Trump was nothing if not predictable. As he reached for the phone, Carney's mind flashed back to a conversation he had had with his predecessor, Trudeau, just days after taking office. "Trump will try to bulldoze you," Trudeau had warned him. "The mistake I made was thinking I could reason with him as an equal. You need a different approach." Now, with his hand on the receiver, Carney was about to reveal exactly what that approach would be.
"Mark, how are you doing, my friend?" Trump's voice boomed through the secure line, carrying that trademark mix of false bonhomie and barely concealed threat that had become his diplomatic signature. "Mr. President," Carney replied, his tone carefully calibrated, respectful but not subservient, professional but not cold. "Thank you for calling."
But what happened next would set the tone for everything that followed. Instead of jumping straight into demands, as his advisors had predicted, Trump spent the first 5 minutes on what seemed like small talk. He complimented Carney's election victory, praised his background in finance, even mentioned how much he respected his work during the 2008 financial crisis. To observers, this might have seemed like genuine warmth, but Carney recognized it for what it was: Trump's classic softening technique. Make the target feel special, create a sense of personal relationship, then drop the hammer when their guard is down. "You know, Mark, you remind me a lot of myself," Trump continued. "Successful businessman who got into politics to fix things. We understand each other, don't we?" "I appreciate that, Mr. President," Carney responded carefully. Then came the pivot. Trump's voice shifted, becoming more serious, more presidential. "Which is why I'm disappointed about this tariff situation, Mark. Really disappointed." Here it was, the opening Carney had been expecting. "I understand your concerns, Mr. President. That's exactly why I was hoping we could discuss this directly." Trump's response revealed everything about his negotiating strategy. "Good, that's what I like to hear. Because honestly, Mark, these retaliatory tariffs you've got on our products, they're hurting American workers, American families. I can't let that continue." The irony was breathtaking. Trump, who had started the trade war with his own tariffs on Canadian goods, was now positioning himself as the victim of Canadian retaliation. But Carney had expected exactly this approach. "Mr. President, I want to find a solution that works for both our countries." It was a perfectly diplomatic response that committed to nothing while appearing cooperative. But Trump, emboldened by what he perceived as weakness, pressed harder. "Here's the thing, Mark. I like you. I really do. But these tariffs are killing us. And you know what? I've got tools I haven't used yet. Big tools, beautiful tools, tools that could make things very difficult for Canada." The threat was unmistakable, but delivered with Trump's characteristic indirection. He wanted Carney to know that worse was coming without explicitly saying what that might be. This was the moment Carney had been preparing for. Instead of responding to the threat directly, Carney did something unexpected. He shifted the conversation to Trump's strength. "Mr. President, I've been watching your trade negotiations around the world, and I have to say, your results have been impressive. The way you've renegotiated deals that weren't working for America, it's exactly the kind of leadership people voted for." The flattery worked exactly as intended. Trump's voice immediately warmed. "Thank you, Mark. That means a lot coming from you. And you're right, we've made incredible deals, the best deals probably in the history of trade deals." But Carney wasn't just stroking Trump's ego. He was setting up his master move. "Which is why I think there's an opportunity here that could benefit both of us, a way to show strength on both sides of the border." Now Trump was intrigued. "I'm listening. What if we could structure this so that you're seen as the deal maker who brought Canada back to the negotiating table, while I'm seen as the leader who put Canadian workers first by focusing our resources on the fights that matter most?" It was a brilliant reframe. Instead of winner and loser, Carney was proposing a scenario where both leaders could claim victory with their domestic audiences. Trump was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Keep talking."
"Here's what I'm thinking," Carney said, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had thought this through from every angle. "Canada removes the retaliatory tariffs on products covered by USMCA. That's the vast majority of our trade anyway. You get to tell Americans that you brought Canada to heel. I get to tell Canadians that we're focusing our fight on the sectors where American tariffs are actually hurting us: steel, aluminum, and autos." The genius of this approach was becoming clear. Carney wasn't actually giving Trump anything meaningful. The USMCA already protected most trade between the two countries. By removing tariffs on products that were largely symbolic, Canada would appear to be making major concessions while actually giving up very little. Meanwhile, by keeping tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, the sectors where Trump's tariffs were having the biggest impact on Canadian workers, Carney could show his domestic audience that he hadn't surrendered on the issues that mattered most to Canadian jobs. That's actually pretty smart, Trump admitted, and there was genuine respect in his voice now. You keep the fight going where it matters to your people, I get to show progress where it matters to mine. Exactly, Mr. President. And here's the beauty of it. This gives us momentum going into the USMCA review next year. We can both point to this as evidence that we know how to work together when we need to. But Trump still had one more card to play. All right, Mark, I like this. I like this a lot. But I need you to know, if you hadn't made this call, if you hadn't shown this kind of flexibility, I was prepared to go much further, much further. It was classic Trump, taking credit for Carney's initiative, while simultaneously threatening what might have happened if Carney hadn't been reasonable. I appreciate your patience, Mr. President, and I think this shows that when leaders are willing to think creatively, we can find solutions that work for everyone. That's right. That's exactly right. And Mark, I want you to know, this conversation we're having right now, this is how real leaders handle business. Behind closed doors, one-on-one, no bureaucrats getting in the way. The irony was perfect. Trump thought he was teaching Carney about deal-making, when in reality, he had just walked into the most sophisticated negotiating trap of his presidency. I couldn't agree more, Mr. President. Direct communication between leaders, that's how things get done. Good. So here's what we're going to do. You announce the tariff removals, I'll make a statement about how productive our conversation was, and we both look like winners. That sounds like a plan, Mr. President. But Carney wasn't finished yet. And, Mr. President, I want you to know that this conversation has given me a lot of confidence about working with you on other issues as well. Climate policy, immigration, defense spending. I think there are opportunities for collaboration that could benefit both our countries. Absolutely, Mark. You know, I was telling my people just yesterday, Carney gets it. He understands how to make deals that work. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Trump sharing his thoughts on various world leaders, most of them unflattering, his frustrations with his own bureaucracy, and his plans for trade policy with other countries. Throughout it all, Carney played the perfect role. He was attentive without being obsequious, engaged without being eager, respectful without being deferential. He asked questions that showed he was listening, offered insights that demonstrated his expertise, and maintained just the right balance of independence and cooperation. By the time Trump said goodbye, he was convinced he had found a kindred spirit in Carney, a practical leader who understood that sometimes you had to make tough decisions to get things done. What he didn't realize was that he had just been completely outmaneuvered by one of the most skilled negotiators in international politics.
As soon as the call ended, Carney's secure line buzzed with activity. Within minutes, his senior staff had assembled in his office. Finance Minister Champagne, Foreign Affairs Minister Jolie, Deputy Prime Minister LeBlanc, and Chief of Staff Katie Simpson all looked at him expectantly. "How did it go?" Jolie asked. Carney leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Exactly as we planned. He thinks he won." But the real test was still to come. Within hours, Carney would have to face the Canadian public and explain why he had appeared to back down in the face of American pressure. His political opponents would pounce on any sign of weakness. The media would dissect every word of his announcement, and his own supporters would need to be convinced that this wasn't capitulation. That evening, Carney stood before the cameras in the National Press Theater.
His message was carefully crafted to serve multiple audiences simultaneously. To Canadians worried about appearing weak, "We're keeping our tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, the sectors where American protectionism is directly attacking Canadian jobs." To Americans looking for signs of progress, "Canada is committed to working constructively with the United States on trade issues." To Trump's ego, "I had a productive conversation with President Trump today about how our two countries can move forward together." The reaction was exactly as Carney had anticipated. Conservative opposition leader Pierre Poilievre immediately accused Carney of caving to Trump's bullying. Progressive critics worried that Canada was surrendering its sovereignty. But economic analysts quickly recognized the strategic brilliance of the move. Carney just gave Trump a symbolic victory while keeping Canada's substantive leverage intact, noted former Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge. "It's masterful." More importantly, the markets responded positively. The Canadian dollar strengthened, business confidence ticked upward, and crucially, Trump tweeted his satisfaction with the outcome. "Great call with PM Carney today. Canada is removing many of their unfair tariffs. When you have strength, you get respect." It was perfect. Trump got to claim victory, his supporters got to celebrate Canada backing down, and Carney got exactly what he wanted: a de-escalation that preserved Canada's position on the issues that actually mattered. But the most remarkable thing about the entire episode was how few people understood what had really happened. Even among Carney's own advisors, there was debate about whether this represented skillful diplomacy or unfortunate necessity. Only Carney himself seemed to fully grasp the dynamics at play, and he wasn't about to explain them publicly.
3 weeks later, the true genius of Carney's approach became apparent. In a private meeting with President Macron of France during a G7 summit in Japan, the Canadian Prime Minister revealed the deeper strategy that had guided his phone call with Trump. "You have to understand," Carney explained to Macron over dinner at a secure location away from the main summit proceedings. "Trump's entire worldview is based on zero-sum thinking. If someone else is winning, he must be losing. If he's not dominating, he's being dominated." Macron nodded thoughtfully. As someone who had his own challenging relationship with Trump, he understood the psychology Carney was describing. "But here's the key insight," Carney continued. "That same psychology that makes him so difficult to negotiate with can also be used strategically. If you let him win battles that don't matter, you can win wars that do matter." The conversation revealed the true scope of Carney's long-term strategy. The tariff phone call wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a comprehensive approach to managing the Canada-US relationship during Trump's presidency. Every interaction, every statement, every policy position was calculated to give Trump what he needed psychologically while advancing Canada's substantive interests. "Take the USMCA review coming up next year," Carney explained. "Trump will want to claim credit for improving the deal, so we'll propose changes that sound significant but actually codify protections for Canadian interests that aren't currently explicit in the agreement." It was a remarkable admission. Carney was essentially describing how to manipulate one of the world's most powerful leaders by appealing to his ego while pursuing your own agenda. "The mistake most leaders make with Trump," Carney said, "is they try to match his aggression with their own aggression, or they try to appeal to his better angels. But Trump doesn't have better angels. He has bigger ego. And if you understand that, you can work with it." But this strategy came with risks. By appearing to give in to Trump's demands, Carney was walking a tightrope. Go too far, and he would look weak to Canadian voters. Don't go far enough, and Trump might escalate to truly damaging measures. The art, Carney told Macron, is in calibrating exactly how much symbolic victory Trump needs to feel satisfied while never actually compromising on anything that matters. It was, Macron realized, exactly the kind of sophisticated diplomatic gamesmanship that Trump's own chaotic style made possible. Because Trump focused so much on appearances and so little on substance, skilled negotiators could give him the former while keeping the latter. And the beautiful thing is, Carney concluded, Trump will never realize what happened. His entire self-image is built around being a master negotiator. He can't afford to recognize when he's been outmaneuvered.
6 months after that pivotal phone call, the true impact of Carney's strategy became clear. Canada and the United States had not only avoided a destructive trade war, but had actually strengthened their economic ties in ways that benefited both countries. The USMCA review process, which could have been a source of major conflict, instead became an opportunity for both leaders to claim credit for improvements to the relationship. Trump got to tell his supporters that he had forced Canada to make concessions. Carney got to tell Canadians that he had protected their interests while building a more stable trading relationship. But perhaps most remarkably, Carney had managed to change the entire dynamic of the Canada-US relationship. Instead of the junior partner constantly responding to American initiatives, Canada had become a proactive player that influenced American policy through strategic engagement rather than confrontation. This shift was most visible in areas like climate policy and defense spending. By framing Canadian positions as being aligned with Trump's own stated goals, energy independence, job creation, national security, Carney was able to advance a progressive agenda that might otherwise have faced American resistance. The phone call technique became a template for other world leaders dealing with Trump. French President Macron, German Chancellor Merkel, and even Chinese President Xi began adopting elements of Carney's approach, giving Trump symbolic victories while pursuing their own substantive agendas. In the end, that 45-minute phone call had reshaped more than just Canada-US relations. It had demonstrated a new model for how smaller powers could successfully engage with unpredictable superpowers in an era of populist leadership and nationalist rhetoric. But perhaps most remarkably, Carney had managed to change the entire dynamic of the Canada-US relationship. Instead of the junior partner constantly responding to American initiatives, Canada had become a proactive player that influenced American policy through strategic engagement rather than confrontation. This shift was most visible in areas like climate policy and defense spending. By framing Canadian positions as being aligned with Trump's own stated goals, energy independence, job creation, national security, Carney was able to advance a progressive agenda that might otherwise have faced American resistance. 1 year later, during a private interview with a trusted journalist that would not be published until after his time in office, Carney finally revealed the most remarkable aspect of his phone call strategy with Trump. "People assume that conversation was about tariffs," he said, settling back in his chair in the Prime Minister's office. "But it was actually about something much more important, establishing the rules of engagement for our relationship going forward." The journalist leaned forward, intrigued. "You see, Trump's entire approach to international relations is based on dominance and submission. He needs to feel like the alpha in every interaction. Most leaders either challenge that directly, which leads to conflict, or they genuinely submit, which leads to exploitation." Carney had found a third path. "What I figured out is that you can give someone the feeling of dominance without actually giving them substantive control. It's about understanding the difference between ceremony and power." The phone call, Carney explained, had established a pattern where Trump could feel like he was getting his way in their interactions, while Carney maintained Canada's ability to pursue its own interests independently. Every subsequent conversation we had followed the same template. Trump would make demands, I would appear to consider them seriously. We would find a compromise that let him claim victory, and Canada would continue doing exactly what we thought was right for our country. It was, the journalist realized, perhaps the most sophisticated manipulation of an American president by a foreign leader in modern history. And the most remarkable thing about it was how completely invisible it had been to outside observers. The key insight, Carney concluded, is that some people can be led, but they can never be driven. Trump is one of those people. Try to force him to do something, and he'll resist automatically. But make him feel like he's in charge while you guide him toward outcomes that work for everyone, and he'll cooperate enthusiastically. As the interview concluded, the journalist asked one final question. Do you think Trump ever figured out what you were doing? Carney smiled, the first genuine smile of the entire conversation. If he had, do you think he would have kept taking my calls? Outside the Prime Minister's office, the Ottawa River continued its ancient flow toward the sea. But inside those walls, one of the most remarkable diplomatic relationships of the 21st century had been built on a foundation of strategic brilliance, disguised as simple phone conversations. And perhaps most remarkably of all, it had worked exactly as planned. The chess master had made his moves so subtly that his opponent never even realized they were playing a game. And by the time anyone understood what had really happened, Mark Carney had already won.
Today, as political scientists study the Carney era, that August phone call is recognized as a turning point, not just in Canada-US relations, but in how smaller powers engage with unpredictable superpowers in the modern world. The Carney model has become a case study in diplomatic schools worldwide. It demonstrates how strategic empathy, understanding your counterpart's psychological needs, even when you disagree with their methods, can be more effective than either confrontation or capitulation. But perhaps more importantly, it shows how true leadership sometimes means being willing to appear weak in order to be strong, to seem to lose in order to win, and to let others take credit in order to achieve your objectives. When Mark Carney picked up that phone call from Trump, he had three choices. The choice he made, to play a game so sophisticated that his opponent never even realized he was being outmaneuvered, may have been the most brilliant diplomatic maneuver of his generation. And the most beautiful part? Trump still thinks he won. Now that you know the real story, what do you think? Was Carney's approach brilliant strategy or dangerous manipulation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories about the hidden power games that shape our world, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because in politics, as in chess, the most important moves are often the ones nobody sees coming. The truth is always more complex than it appears, and sometimes the greatest victories are won not through force, but through understanding the game better than anyone else at the table.